A special problem is always the determination of the current end of a series. It's the most interesting because nobody knows the results and everybody wants to know them. It's the most difficult because a lot of sources aren't available at the time of calculation. So the quarterly national accounting relies on more limited data sources in general than the annual accounting, and we have to introduce more statistical and econometric techniques. There are two approaches, a direct approach and an indirect approach. In the direct approach, similar data sources as in annual national accounting are available quarterly or even monthly. And hence, similar compilation techniques are applicable. But nevertheless, lacking data, for example, for the last month of a quarter, have to be modeled. Even if you have, for the first 2 months, a complete set of the same data sources you use in annual accounting, if the third month lags, you have to find some measure for extrapolation and for estimation the missing results. And in general, this means econometrics. And then there's an indirect approach. That means statistical and econometric estimations based on annual and national accounts and short-term indicators. We use the annual accounting results as a guiding line and short-term indicators as hints where the quarterly results may lie. We extrapolate present time series with approximated change rates, and alongside clean mathematics, that means established statistical, mathematical, and econometric techniques, this field of work is still a playing ground for the assessments of skilled specialists in national accounting. That means the administrators of national accounting used to calculate, for example, gross fixed capital formation or household consumption, will use their experience and their knowledge to establish estimations that are not purely mathematically based and not easily to be calculated by econometric methodology, but also reflects their experience and opinions. And sometimes their estimations are as good or even better than the results you get from time series analysis. So, but let's assume we have annual data for example, the whole year in which our reporting quarter, to which our reporting quarter belongs. And we want to subdivide this reporting year into reporting quarters. Then we use some techniques. First is benchmarking to annual data. We want to construct a quarterly time series from existing annual data. What do we want to achieve with it? We want estimates for quarterly national accounts that follow the behavior of the indicator we use. And, very important, we want a temporarily consistency with annual national accountings. That means the results of the 4 quarters shall add up to the annual result. There are different methods available. The main methods are first smoothing annual data without additional information, without, for example, an indicator. It's a purely mathematical approach. I will show you soon how it works. Second, numerical methods. The most well-known, the best-known method is the Denton method. It's benchmarking to an indicator. Then there are statistical models, for example, the Chow-Lin temporal disaggregation method. This is laid down in the literature of the late 70s and incorporated into most advanced statistical software, so you can apply it on the data set you have at hand. And lastly, you can make a regression calculation between the annual variable and an annualized indicator, and then subdivide the results you obtain on the quarters. This is the first method I mentioned, smoothing. Here, first laid out from the authors Boots, Phipps and Lisman in 1967, you see, quite mature. And this you can imagine as a superior grade moving average. And although it's a very old and very simple method, it is quite popular today in the statistical routine. Why? It's plain programmable, easily applicable. You can use any Excel sheet you want for this method. Second, there are no discretionary interventions of the administrator. That means this method of timely disaggregation is free from influences that human beings could falsely induce. Third, we have stable quarterly results for past reporting years, because each reporting year is handled individually and not touched by the results of neighboring years, which is the case in, by the way, statistical methodology regression analysis, where the whole regression function changes when new added data at the current end of the time series changes the whole data set. And therefore, the disaggregational results of past years. That's here not the case. It's applicable for variables with no or low or maybe unknown seasonality. As you see, it's smoothing. That means it minimizes the differences between the growth rates of the neighboring quarters. When you look at the red dotted line, these are the annual results divided by 4. And then you have a stairway, yeah, with sharp jumps from the 4th to the 1st quarter, and then a horizontal shape throughout the year. This is a form of disaggregation not applicable, of course, for obvious reasons. And the smoothing minimizes these jumps. But we have no seasonal structure in the data. What might be okay if your variable is not seasonal affected by itself. For example, consumption of fixed capital. But this smoothing neglects further information, maybe obtainable by interesting indicators. And at the current end, you need additional forecasting of the annual series that you want to subdivide into quarters. In Germany, we use this simple approach for consumption of fixed capital, depreciation in the real world, for gross fixed capital formation in software and databases, and for gross fixed capital formations in originals, as well as the acquisitions and disposals of valuables. These are variables where only annual calculations are at hand. There are no sub-annual source statistics, and we assume that there is no business cycle or shorter business cycle, no seasonal cycle that we have to care for. Second, benchmarking to annual data. We have annual variable that should be divided into quarters. These are the green beams, the annual gross value added in our example. And the blue line is the quarterly production indicator that we want to use for disaggregation. It's not exactly the same production as gross value added, but it's somehow linked. The Denton method translates a data reconciliation problem into a weighted quadratic optimization problem under linear conditions. It preserves the movement of the indicator series while satisfying the annual constraint. That means we will use the seasonal figure our indicator gives us, the quarterly results our indicator gives us, but our derived results will sum up to the annual gross value added in this example. Nonetheless, also in this approach, we need forecasting for the latest year. That means for the missing annual data on gross value added. Here are the formulas. You can apply the Denton approach in first differences, where you calculate the minimum of the differences between the amount of the indicator and the amount we search of the quarterly volume, in this example gross value added. Or you can do proportional on first differences, where they are weighted with the extension of the indicator. And these are the results. It's the same graphic as before, but now we have a red line. These are the benchmarked series with the Denton method of the quarterly gross value added. As you can see, they follow the behavior of the production indicator, but they are not exactly the same, another amount, and they meet the annual volume. The seasonal movements of the indicator are well preserved, and the aggregation constraint is met. Now let's move to another problem, deflation. In the year, I think it was 2005, national accounting was transferred from the former used deflation with fixed prices of a basic year into a chain-linked system where the deflation takes place on the basis of the prices of the former year. The main reason for this was that the basic years were often far away in the past with very different price structures. And by using these old prices in the less pair system, you forego the market reactions on price changes. That means in your reporting year, you take some good that has experienced a sharp decline in price. By the way, for example, some IT hardware has gone cheap. And to obtain fixed price results, you have it to multiply with prices of a 4, 5, 6 years old basic year. and you obtain a large volume in this case. And for other goods with increases in price, there you obtain a much too small volume. And in general, fixed price deflation leads to an overestimation of the inflation rate. This was the first problem. And the second problem was the introduction of hedonic pricing, of price adjustments that reflect the difference in functionality and quality of the goods measured. That didn't fit together, so we had to use another system, and this is chain linking. The yearly chain linking of the prices, the deflation in the frame of the annual national accounting, corresponds to a quarterly chain linking. We also deflate by chain links on a quarterly base. And we have different challenges with this approach. There are some requirements that we have to look for, and methods. The most used method today, and the method many countries agreed on 15 years ago, is the annual overlap method. It's the common practice in EU countries with only a few exceptions. Its advantages are, first, it's the easiest computation. The deflated data on the quarterly base are consistent with annual chain-linked volume data. And so quarterly chain-linked volumes are consistent with annual chain-linked volumes, so that the sum of quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4 equals the annual volume. But there's also a problem, because between the chain-linked data of the fourth quarter of a year and the first quarter of the next year, there is a break. It's not smooth at this point, but there is a break in the time series. That's the price you have to pay for the consistency with the annual data. Therefore, price statistics prefer another method, the one-quarter overlap method, that gives us the smoothest transitions between quarters. But the quarterly data don't aggregate exactly to the corresponding direct annual index. And that is extremely difficult for national accounting, where everything should be consistent and fit together. Therefore, most countries decided for annual overlap. And then there are no other methods, for example, over-the-year overlap methods, that is not recommended because strong changes in relative quantities and prices may result in distorted seasonal patterns in the linked series. Let's have a closer look at the annual overlap method. I will discuss some aspects of the annual overlap method in more detail now. The source I use and that I give to you is the IMF's publication of the IMF Statistics Department Quarterly National Accounts Manual in the 2017 edition. In Chapter 8 you will find the formulas I will use in the next slides, and at the web link provided you can get the whole annual for free. The principle of the annual overlap method is that it implies compiling estimates for each quarter at the weighted annual average prices of the previous year. The annual data at previous year prices provide the linking factors to scale the quarterly data upward or downward. To do this, the annual overlap method requires quarterly volume measures at previous year's prices and annual current price data. And it is done in 3 steps in principle. First, we have to calculate the quarterly volume indices for the previous year. The formulas you see here, I won't discuss them in detail. And go to the second step. In the second step, you have to link the quarterly volume indices using annual overlaps. And then you should re-reference the quarterly chain series to a chosen year, instead year 1. That means you have a chain that starts at the first reporting year you want to calculate or you have data for. And the second year is measured in terms of the first year. And this first year is measured in nothing because there is no earlier, more ancient data available. Hence, it is its values, its linking values are set to 1 or 100. And throughout your time series, you use the same linking mechanism between neighboring years. In contrast to the fixed price method, you have no fixed basic year with fixed price amounts that you use in the whole time series, but you use the prices of neighboring years, and hence, because it's a monotone transformation, you could use each year of your time series as the anchor year with value of 1 or 100. And this to re-reference the quarterly chain series to a chosen year, instead year 1, you can choose a year and then recalculate the values of all the other years. This is an example left to the interested reader, what you obtain for values when you use this method for real-life national accounting data. The second important issue we have to tackle is seasonal and/or calendar adjustment of our quarterly data. That contains only a part of the whole seasonal cycle we know from the whole year. And the ESA 2010 transmission program says the following. This is, by the way, the textbook and the rule that specifies which data the member states have to send to Eurostat. Quarterly data, it says on page 65, footnote 1, quarterly data are to be provided in non-seasonally adjusted form as well as in seasonally adjusted form, including calendar adjustments when relevant. Seasonally adjusted quarterly data and the previous year prices are not to be provided. The provision of quarterly data that only include calendar adjustments is voluntary. Why are there some variables that are seasonally as well as calendar adjusted and other maybe not, for good reason? Because there are economic actions that depend on the day of the week. For example, shopping. Okay, online shopping can occur at every point in time, but when you want to go to a local analog shop, you have to do it during the opening hours. Not on Sunday, not on Easter, not on Christmas. But other economic activities occur throughout the days. For example, employment. When you are employed, there are days on which you work and there are days of recreation. But you are still employed both types of days. And if it happens that in some reporting year or some reporting quarter, the holiday season is maybe longer. For example, Easter is in the second quarter and not in the first quarter. Then it shouldn't affect employment although it's clearly a calendar effect on production or trade. And hence employment mustn't calendar adjustment so strictly as the other variables. In its publication, Eurostat publishes 4 types of quarterly national accounting series in Eurobase, which is available for free download. First, unadjusted data, neither seasonally adjusted nor calendar adjusted. Second, seasonally adjusted data, but not calendar adjusted. Third, calendar adjusted, but not seasonally adjusted. And last, and really not least, seasonally and calendar adjusted data. These are, as I said, not available for each and every country. And of course, each and every variable. Each seasonal adjustment works the same way. You have a time series and it consists of 3 main components. First, the trend cycle. These are long-term trends and business cycles. Second, the seasonal and calendar effect. The seasonal effect should be reasonably stable in terms of annual timing. Yeah, you always have Christmas, you always have the summer holidays, you always have administrative deadlines for some actions. You always have a typical climate and a typical weather, although some people tell us it's changing. But it's still stable enough to establish known seasonal effects. Part of this seasonal effect is calendar-induced, holidays. Another part is induced by nature, for example, weather and climate. And then you have non-seasonal calendar effects. They are not stable in terms of annual timing. So the number and composition of working days, the leap year effect, moving holidays, for example, with Easter. These 2 subgroups form together the seasonal and calendar effect. And third, you have a irregular component. That are effects that are unpredictable in terms of timing, impact and duration. For example, outliers, natural disasters, strikes. Today, of course, influence and consequences of the corona pandemic. Here you have a graphic visualization in an example. It's just stylized, not real values. As you can see, the original time series in the upper left chart results in the seasonally adjusted time series, this is in the upper mid part, by elimination of the seasonal component, as we see in the lower mid. In the upper mid graphic, the seasonal adjusted time series are still present the combined trend and irregular components that you can see in the lower left and the lower right of our pictures. Seasonal adjustment does not mean extracting the trend. It does mean removing the season. The irregular influences shall still be in our data. Today we have a very powerful and at the same time effective tool to calculate seasonal and calendar adjustment measures, GDemetra+. This is the recommended software for seasonal adjustment of the official statistics within the European statistical system and the European system of central banks. The tools within GDemetra+, the core engines, comprise all applications necessary to conduct seasonal and calendar adjustment of high statistical quality. The results of GDemetra+, it stems from France and hence I try not to pronounce it German or English, GDemetra+. GDemetra+ has been tested in particular by the Seasonal Adjustment Center of Excellence. They conducted a large-scale testing tried to reproduce seasonal adjustment processes and compared the functions to Tremor seeds and ARIMA X13 seeds applications. And GDemetra Plus took all these tests very well. It's a free open source software and available at the following web link, and it runs, for example, on Windows.